He had three wonderful panelists joining us tonight, and we're just going to have a conversation because I think that's the best way for all of us to learn and engage and to talk about these issues. But I thought there was some basic kind of definitions that we all wanted to come from and some perspectives because they've all been thinking about and working in a space a little bit. The worlds have touched on it. So let me introduce them and let them introduce themselves and the context with which they come to this discussion. Renee Hudson is a neuropsychologist. Renee, will you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you've come to competency?
Is this on?
Yes.
All right, it's working. Yes, I am a neuropsychologist. And for those of you who have never heard of a neuropsychologist, count your blessings. And daily, I assess people's ability to be independent, their ability to drive, but never have I ever heard my field referred to as ticklish. I like that. I might start using that. I'm a neuropsychologist with Methodist Health System. I'm at the Indian Hills Clinic. And although we specialize in geriatrics, I do see individuals from 19 up. In my previous life in private practice, I did see ages 6 and up through the lifespan, and also did some forensic work. So if you're an attorney and you see my name, and I'll be talking today about how the brain ages and what people may notice, what's normal aging, what is not normal aging.
And then next to her is Dr. Steve Wengel, who is a psychiatrist.
So good evening. I'm a geriatric psychiatrist, and now that I've turned 65 not that long ago, I like to say I am truly a geriatric psychiatrist. So I've practiced at UNMC, been practicing 34 years, and have a number of physicians, mostly retired in my practice, but at one point I had a brief role with Children's Hospital, and now it's called Children's Nebraska, to evaluate their aging medical staff members. I have a strong interest in this, personally as well as just professionally.
And then next to him is Chris Aupperle, who is an attorney.
I'm Chris Aupperle, Nebraska lawyer, and I work for Nebraska State Bar Association. I run a program called the Nebraska Lawyers Assistance Program, which is a help resource within the legal profession that helps lawyers and judges and law students that may be affected by all kinds of issues, whether it be mental health, stress, substance use issues, or cognitive issues. And we're really, we're kind of a peer-to-peer support network within our profession. And I'm not part of like our discipline or our licensing folks. We have special confidentiality rules, but really our goal is to help our lawyers, judges, and law students seek help for things that may be impacting them. And so certainly this is an issue we get phone calls on and get involved with. And I'm glad we're having this discussion tonight.
So Renee, let's start with you. How do you define competency mentally for the brain?
So that is a loaded question. So every field has different parameters. So when we think about the aging brain, we begin to lose a few steps in our cognition starting around age 30 and 40. Things like, I can't remember as much. We all have a certain capacity for memory. Some of us are a little more gifted at that than others, but as we age, that shrinks. So whereas before you could keep in mind, I have 8 procedures to do today and this. From a personal perspective, and I'm 57, I fully admit that, where I could keep my cases pristinely in memory and rebuild what they looked like on their assessment with me. Now I have to go back and look at my notes for at least half of them. So again, that capacity for memory shrinks, but we make up for that with our experience and strategies and techniques. So normal aging includes a little bit of memory decline. The one I hear people complain about the most is, I can't find that word I want to use. It's right there. Or that actor's name, I can visualize it. That happens a lot It's when these cognitive changes, decreased attention, slowed speed of cognitive processing. These are all normal aging kinds of things. But when they start to interfere with how you do your job, that's when the issue of competency comes up. Now, many of us are blessed to have assistants that help manage our calendars and keep us on track and kind of pare things down. So instead of having to remember 10 things, I only have to remember 5. It makes a difference. It keeps us clicking along. Where the issue comes into play is I am doing a procedure that has 10 different steps, perhaps surgical procedure, and I missed 2 of them in the middle. That's a red flag. Or I have certain things that I need to do for this estate planning, and I thought about doing this, but I don't remember if I did that. Again, that's a bit of a red flag. It happens pretty frequently, but when it begins to interfere, okay, and I said that twice now, when it starts to interfere with the job you do, that is when you need to take a little closer look at, is there something else going on in a broader picture of cognition? So, okay, I'm worried that I'm not doing this well, or my partner in my firm, he comes in every day or she comes in every day and kind of sits at the desk, and what used to take them 20 minutes to do, now they're spending 2 days on, and they're billing for that, and the client's not very happy. Red flag. So what do you do in that respect? You talk with your person you're concerned about. Here's the sticky part, and Dr. Wengel will probably talk with this also. One of the hallmarks of an Alzheimer's dementia is complete lack of insight. There is absolutely nothing wrong with my memory. I don't know why my family made me come here and do this. Same thing happens in a professional setting, particularly in those who they are is their job. And so there is many reasons that people don't want to think about it, but oftentimes it really is a brain issue that the insight just isn't there. Our brain tells us about ourselves. And so if our brain isn't up to par, it's not going to give us that feedback that, wow, I'm really having trouble with this. So there are dents and dings on my car, but somebody hit me in the parking lot, I'm sure, with their door. Well, no, that wasn't the case. So there are those subtle things to look for. Sometimes it's much more glaring, and these are hard conversations to have, particularly with someone who is your mentor and you respect them greatly, and to watch them have these difficulties. If it is at all possible, it's always good to have a policy in place. If there are concerns, nurses notice things. Your paralegals notice things. Your front desk staff notice things. Have a safe way to convey that information to someone in authority. And okay, we need to take this a little further and have that policy in place. Now, do most of us have that in place? No, we don't. Kind of don't want to think about it. They're going to retire. It's fine. They're going to retire in a year. Well, in the meantime, if they're a surgeon, they're doing surgery, or they're prescribing certain medications, it can become an issue. So that was a long answer to a complex question. But again, I'll say it for a third or fourth time, when it begins to interfere with the work, that's when the red flags go up. Most of the time, those of us who experience these normal aging kinds of things have great compensatory strategies. Truly, what we are losing in cognition, we make up for in experience and wisdom, and we bring a lot to the table with those kinds of things. Did I answer that question?
That was a good explanation, Renee. Okay, Steve Wengel. So there is 2 facets of this, because when we talk about competency, we all think about the cognitive part of competency. But we know if you're a surgeon, your fine motor skills. So talk about the physical breakdown of competency when you had to look at this.
Yeah, and so the news is similar. As we know, you can't fight biology, and with aging, things, our reaction time, fine motor skills, and other things, vision, other things like that affect your ability to do procedures, I think, does go down. Now, again, what do I know as a psychiatrist? I always tell people, as long as I can kind of do this, I can still practice. So if you can see in the back of the room, I'm just castling my fingers in a stereotyped psychiatry gesture. But I don't really have to have real good fine motor skills, but a surgeon does, or another proceduralist does. And so one really interesting program where they've started an aging surgeons assessment program in Baltimore a number of years ago, just to address this very thing. And it's like a 2-day process where they look at cognition. They do a big battery of neuropsychological testing, like Dr. Hudson talks about, but they also have like an ophthalmologic exam and a neurological exam and so forth, and OT, occupational therapy, and so forth, to look at all of those things. I'm not sure I'm answering the question very well.
But your body does break down.
Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah. But like you say, or like you said, Renee, too, it's, you've got this one thing, the biology is sort of going down, but wisdom and experience is going up. So to me, that's the interesting question. Where do those two paths cross? Where do you say that the biological changes are significant enough that the compensatory mechanisms and the wisdom and experience are not able to keep up with those other changes? That's where the rubber meets the road, I think.
So Chris, if you are a hospital system and you say, I want everyone over the age of 75 to now take these competency tests, or if you are a law firm that says when you turn 65, you have to go to a council or mandatory retirement, is that legal?
I will preface this, as all lawyers do, not to give any specific legal advice, and they will always depend upon the facts and the circumstances. Generally speaking, you do potentially run afoul of some laws that are out there to protect older people. There's laws that protect you from discriminating in employment against older people. Generally over, it doesn't have to be that old, over the age of 50, can fall in those categories. There have been some lawsuits over the programs that were just discussed. So I know of one in Connecticut, and I know of another one in Michigan, where a doctor was told you have, and keep in mind, these assessments don't happen because somebody made a mistake or we were seeing necessarily any decline in this person's skills. We were just picking an age and saying, if you're over that age, you have to go do this stuff, even if you've done nothing wrong and we've seen no signs that there's any type of cognitive decline or in some cases, physical decline. The lawsuit in Michigan, I think, got settled out of court, so we don't know. Ultimately, you would assume maybe some changes were made within that medical system for that settlement to happen. The one in Connecticut, I think, is still pending. And so I do think there is some legal pitfalls in just picking age and doing that. And the flip side of that is we're trying to protect patients, right? So like, how do we find that balance of not having an undue obligation on a doctor to go have to do these things and trying to go find something when there hasn't been a problem? And our legal system and frankly, even our licensing system is, the idea there is that we don't try to go find a problem, we react to problems that happen. And you could argue whether that's a good idea or a bad idea, but that's generally the way we regulate the profession. And so if there is a problem, often a licensing entity is going to get involved, and that's a whole separate level, right? That's no longer your employment. That's no longer hospital privileges, but that's, can you continue to practice or not, or will there be restrictions placed on your type of practice? And so we do see that within the legal profession at times. We hope to catch people way before we're at that level, right? That's the safety net, whether you keep your license or not. And we'd like to have in place some mechanisms that help prevent from getting to that place. But the lack of self-knowledge of this issue impacting them makes this one particularly tricky. I can tell you one short story, which is the guy that I took over this. So I practiced law for about 25 years, and then 8 years ago, I took over this role at the Bar Association. And the guy that I took it over from was 75 when he retired. And when he was about 65 and I was a volunteer for his committee, he came to me and said, if I'm ever showing signs of not being able to function appropriately to do this job, I'm giving you permission to have a conversation with me over this. And I thought, what an amazing idea, right? Because when you empower somebody else that you trust to have that conversation with you, I think that goes a long way in terms of catching these things before they become a malpractice case or they become an injured, or affected patient or client for a lawyer.
Have you ever seen anything affected in an organization for this issue of competency measurement that doesn't assign a random age or
Yeah, I think it starts with what we're doing tonight, which is communication and education about it. I think for a long time, this is something we ignored and didn't want to talk about. I think you have to do that. Unfortunately, a lot of law firms wait until there's a problem to try to figure out how to address it. I think you're much better off to be proactive about it ahead of time. When everybody's healthy and performing well, that's the time to decide how we're going to handle this, not we've now got a problem and this partner won't leave and we're afraid of a malpractice case and things are starting, clients are getting upset and stuff. So I think organizationally, one would be communication about the issue within them, having those conversations about empowering people to have those conversations back with you if they see something. It's also really important to talk to staff. Staff will often think they're helping by covering up mistakes and fixing mistakes. And we have some, you all know the lawyer, like you have some incredible staff that knows probably the law as well as you do after a long career. And often, unfortunately, they're covering up some of those mistakes. And so having those conversations with staff as to why it's important that they bring it to the attention of others and not to do that, I think is a very effective tool as well. So, but there's no silver bullet, unfortunately. And some of the lawyers, we talked about earlier, they want to die, sitting at their desk until the very last case.
So tell us, and I'm going to open to all three of you guys to answer how you ever want. Whose responsibility is it to have that conversation if you see it? Whether you are the employer, colleague, friend, relative, caregiver, spouse, exactly. Whose job is it? Whose responsibility? And if you have, if it's one of those, what's that what are your thoughts on that conversation in any of those roles?
So again, I deal with this every day. And when I say every day, I mean every day. So when it comes to family members, that gets a little dicier because many times the spouse who is caretaking for the declining spouse is fiercely loyal to them, and they do not want anybody to come in and put me in a hole. You're going to put me in a hole. We hear that a lot. So that is a very different dynamic than a work dynamic. But then it's not so different because you have someone who's been with the firm or been your mentor and you are loyal to them and you think the world of them. It is one of those conversations that you just need to have it. You're going to worry about it. You're going to hem-haw around it. If you sugarcoat it and someone has some cognitive difficulties, they're not going to understand what you're really talking about. So you do need to just say it. So Mary Lou, the staff has mentioned that you have missed these deadlines and filed this incorrectly or missed this component of this. And we've also noticed that you repeat yourself in our meetings sometimes. And I'm concerned. Take ownership. I'm concerned that there's something going on with your thinking. Let's get it checked out. That's it. You put it out straight kind, but also use the facts. Many times you're going to get pushback to that. I have been practicing law longer than you've been alive. Driving is the same thing. I've been driving since I was 14 years old. Yeah, well, you're 90 and things are different. We don't say that, of course, but it's that same principle. I've been doing this forever, and they're drawing on that wisdom and experience. You don't know. They do have difficulties with some things, and providing them with options for an assessment, whether it's with Dr. Wengel or whether it's with a neuropsychologist, to get an accurate reflection of where they're having difficulty. And again, I can go over the results with someone and they will look me in the eye and say, there's nothing wrong with me. Your tests are wrong. How could you know that? Yeah, there's nothing wrong. So again, it's that uphill battle. Having something in place within your organization, if someone refuses assessment or fails assessment but will not leave, these are the steps to take. So have them move to as counsel or however is comfortable for your organization to manage that. Larger organizations tend to do a little bit better with that than smaller, more intimate organizations because they're like family. They're like family. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. And, and again, going back to the basics of your question too, Carol, who's responsible? I guess it's all of our responsibility. And particularly as professionals, we do have, as physicians, we have that first do no harm thing that we swore to many years ago. And, it is about protecting patients. And so we should should take that responsibility seriously, but it doesn't happen all the time, right? Because it is a delicate conversation, and you're right. You're going to get pushback, and most of us don't really like confrontation, and especially if it is somebody senior to us, which it most often is, somebody you respect, somebody may have trained us. Now you have to tell them that they're slipping. It's a real tough thing. But it is, at the end of the day, it is actually a kindness, because obviously it would be terrible for them, for that patient and the system, to let it go unchecked and then have something really disastrous happen.
Yeah, absolutely agree that it's all our responsibility. I do think it's really important to identify that first person or persons to start the conversation. I think that's critical. You need people of a high level of trust and familiarity. And it would probably, like in a law firm, help if you don't have a financial interest in that person leaving, because that becomes, you're trying to get me out just to get my clients or whatever. And so I do think that that's critical. And to your point, like the spouse sometimes is not the right person, because sometimes they have a financial interest in that person continuing to bring home a paycheck, or otherwise they're just very protective of their reputation. And so an adult child, if have a high level of knowledge of the situation, can be incredibly helpful. A partner in the law firm that's of equal, I think, stature can be very helpful. And as you talked about, like whenever we've had this go on, we'll walk through and kind of coach the people ahead of time and say, these are the things you might hear or reactions. And by the way, you can get any reaction, from crying to anger to silence to walking out of the room to what. So you have to be ready for anything, but we'll kind of coach them through a little bit of reactions you might get. And we actually, about 7 or 8 years ago, we were talking about this table. I had one of the doctors at Methodist come present at our annual bar meeting, and we talked about cognitive issues in lawyers, cognitive decline. And part of that presentation, we actually had some lawyers act out what that would look like. And that could have gone either really well or really awkward, depending on how it went. I had some phenomenal volunteers, and the reason they were really good is because all those volunteers had been part of those real life conversations at some point. And so they were able to really show you what the reaction might look like or what the questions you might get. And we had so many people afterwards tell us how much they appreciated getting to kind of see how you might start it and how you might react. And then the last piece is, like, don't diagnose them. But as Renee mentioned, just like, can we start with you just going to somebody and getting an assessment, figuring out what, if anything's going on and what might be causing it? Because when you start to go too far down the road, I think that really scares people. But just that idea of just that starting point And doctors and lawyers are so proud of the people they serve and the people they help. And so I think that's the other thing that you can use in that conversation is to say, you know, we know you would never want to do anything to harm one of your clients or cause a problem for one of your clients. And so isn't it important that we make sure that you're in the right position in order to help them? And so a lot of times you can kind of play on that because they do have a lot of pride in people to help.
And just to piggyback onto that, if you send someone for an assessment, let us be the bad guy and talk about no more practicing, no more driving, those kinds of things. I have a question for you, Chris. So there's precedent with things, people like airline pilots that must retire at a certain age because public safety is at issue. Certainly that's a similar thing for a physician. How can we extrapolate from that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there are certain safety sensitive positions who have like some mandatory retirement ages, but I think a lot of those were set a long time ago, and there's kind of within those industries a precedent, but there was also anti-discrimination laws that have been established maybe even after those are around, and sometimes it takes somebody maybe challenging a pilot to challenge it. At the same time, we don't want to turn a blind eye to it and wait until there's a catastrophe and a patient or a client are hurt. And so I do think we have to find some middle ground. And certainly it starts with, I doubt these things often go from totally competent to not competent within, you know, a day, right? It happens over months and sometimes years. And so often we're getting warning signs and we're just not doing anything about them. And so I think that's really the important part is when we get those early warning signs to start to take some action about it. People are also probably more receptive early on to that than maybe you wait until it's, you know, really far down the road, and if it's Alzheimer's or something where they're being very combative or angry or other symptoms of that disease are affecting their ability to even have a conversation.
Agree. And with an Alzheimer's dementia, it's a slow, steady decline. And it's the little things that people notice. Now, if somebody has a traumatic brain injury from a bike accident or a stroke, that's actually easier because there is such a decline immediately following the event. No question on that one. But you're absolutely right with those slow, whether it's a frontotemporal dementia or a frontal lobe dementia or an Alzheimer's dementia. So you may not always see memory issues. You can see behavioral changes. Completely out of character types of comments to staff. This happens. Where the staff is up in arms and I'm going to quit because of this. Well, in fact, it very well may be a frontal lobe dementia that is progressing. So those unusual behaviors, disinhibited behaviors. I just bought 3 Porsches because I couldn't decide on the color. Now, I don't know, the attorneys make a lot of money, so maybe that's the case. So impulsive. I'm developing a gambling habit later in life. These are, again, red flags to watch for. Dr. Wengel?
Yeah, a couple other and the things I did a little bit of, you know, kind of a real brief literature search too to kind of figure out what's the lay of the land, because this is a thorny issue, at least in medicine. And, you know, hospitals and clinics all over the country have been wrestling with this for many years, and there's still no real consensus. Yeah, do we do mandatory testing? If so, what's the testing look like at what age, whatever. Couple of concrete things we do know. So you mentioned mandatory retirement ages. So airline pilots are 65, air traffic control people are 56, FBI agents are 57. And here's the best part. In case you're thinking about, you know, getting out of law or medicine and because you're getting burned out and want to become a lighthouse keeper, 65. So you have to leave. You could literally, there is a law that says you cannot be a lighthouse keeper after age 65. On a serious note, though, the NHS, the National Health Service in the UK, did have mandatory retirement. I can't remember what age, but they had a mandatory retirement age for a while. We got a lot of pushback, plus they have a physician shortage. So they unwound that. So they undid it, interestingly enough.
Dr. Longley, did you have a question?
The ATD requirement for air traffic controllers are in the process of being low for the shortage.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
All very flexible, it seems, when it comes to the
Interesting. Yeah.
And I do think that, to your point, having those hard mandatory retirement dates, do rob us of some very skilled, experienced people. And so these cognitive issues, when particularly you're talking about like at 66, like the majority of people are fine. Like we're not saying that most people shouldn't be. We're saying there is a minority that shouldn't be, and that grows with age. But I do think, there are probably a better system than is picking an age. And also people are living longer and health is different. And like you can pick an age and then that age is no longer accurate. And so I do think there's a lot of, there has to be a better way. And we don't have that solution necessarily to present to you tonight, because I think it's something the American Medical Association and others have really looked at very hard and tried to say what's the best way to do this. So that's kind of my take on it.
I suspect before too long, AI will be doing some computer-based testing for professionals and using that as a screening. I don't know if you know anything about the neuropsychology situation here at the city of Omaha. My wait time is a year to get in. That's ridiculous. And that's pretty typical for the med center, for up at CHI. So there's going to be computerized screenings that do rely on the algorithms, speech therapy from AI, and it's coming. And those will look at things like memory span, working memory, keeping things in mind and calculating and then giving a response in a timely manner. Now, one of the things we talked about that decreases as we get older is reaction time, that speed of cognitive processing. So these are all things that are evolving. It's coming, I think, sooner rather than later because it is necessity, just like the air traffic controllers can be older now because of necessity. I think that is coming as well.
Are there any self-assessment tools that somebody learned? Within a lot of this is making yourself aware, at least thinking about this. What's going on with my cognition, to my decision making? Because I think a lot of us been the idea that, oh, maybe something is happening. I don't think you come in sort of, oh, this is a shot. Who really kind of have an idea that main things are they're not quite as crisp as you were. Well, these self-assessment tools are allowing you to explore that. Because going up for a neuropsychiatric, it's sort of black box. You know what's going to happen. You don't know the questions, and don't know the procedure, but it has a pretty proud results. So, I can argue generate for individuals to assess their own competence series, get ready for that discussion.
Can all of you hear that? No. So he's asking, is there a way to self-assess some awake cognitive or neurological decline?
So there are some computerized tasks out there that are free, or you could pay to do some of them. The tricky part with those is most of them are normed on the general population. This room skews the bell curve on intellectual functioning. So if I am a physician or an attorney who's used to operating up here, and take one of these tests and I'm right within the average range, that reflects a decline for someone who's quite bright to be in the average range now. So yes, there are some out there. Many of them are going to look at speed of processing, attention span, visual problem solving, that fluid reasoning kind of thing. And some of them are really fun to do. So if you find one, go ahead and do that. Don't give them your credit card though. Bad things happen. So yes, there are some out there. There are some startup IT companies that do have computerized measures. I know that there is currently a company that computerized the minicog. Like the minicog is remember 3 words, draw a clock. What were those 3 words? I don't know why you need that computerized, but it takes the human factor out of that. And there are others that are more complex than that as well. The more complex ones obviously are for a fee. And then they purport to have someone look over those in certain cases. I don't know if they really do, or again, if it's AI that does that. It's still very new. So a long answer to your question is that, but yes, there are some of those out there. And if you want to know what a neuropsych test is like, you can go online and it will talk about the different areas that are assessed. Now, in theory, you're not supposed to be able to find our tests that we actually use online because of test security, because if people can practice them, then we don't get good data. Not always the case, but in theory, that is the case. We will push you to your limit to see the best that you can do. A neuropsych test is something with a very high ceiling, so people who are very bright can still get something out of that measure. But again, it takes forever to get in. If you pay out of pocket, it's expensive. Run it through your insurance if you need to, but then it becomes part of your medical record. And that creates a whole nother bit of, okay, now it's in my medical record. And if I'm a physician and I go see my primary care physician, the nurse is going to be looking through that. Oh no. Yes, we have HIPAA, but this may come as a shock. Not everybody adheres to that as well as they should. So there's upsides to the assessment, but there's also an inherent risk with that. Chris, do you want to talk to that a little bit?
Well, yeah, certainly. And also the fear is, I get sued for malpractice and now I've created a record that says that I may not be fully competent. There is a, as a lawyer, we always think, unfortunately, in that direction. And that often prevents people from wanting to go do, or they think they're going to get the driving privileges or there's something else taken away as well, even if they're not, it's not at that level. The one thing you mentioned to me previously, that there's also the option to get like a baseline assessment. So it's not, I'm having necessarily issues, but maybe I'm at an age, I'm 60, 65, something. And I say, I'd like to get a baseline so that, to your point, I could be anywhere, there's not a one set number. Right. And so in the future, if I start to experience some issues, I can go back, get a full assessment. You can compare it to the baseline and say, yeah, there's been a significant change, or there's only been maybe a small change. So I don't know if you want to just real quickly talk about that as an option.
Sure. This is a program I developed with Methodist, and very gung-ho about that. 1 hour, private pay, doesn't go in the medical record, doesn't get billed to your insurance. It hits the high points. And I had seen 3 or 4 people and we're good to go. One of my partners quit and the other one went on maternity leave. So I'm doing clinical stuff right now. So I would say that will restart by the end of August. But again, these are measures that the ceiling is for average people, right? People within the average range. And not infrequently, I'll have someone who is brilliant come in and they have really had a decline, but still look great on those tests. So I actually just talked with our psychometrist earlier today about if we were to design a screening battery or a baseline battery for high-level professionals, what would that involve? And we actually put together a pretty decent screening that we could do with folks that are higher level. Of course, it's not going to be just an hour because we're really going to hit hard on working memory and executive functioning. So executive functioning are those abilities that let us function in a unpredictable world, kind of flex and adjust and problem solve. It's really challenging to assess true day-to-day executive functioning in an office, right? I'm not standing in that surgical suite. I am not in that courtroom listening to closing arguments. We do what we can with that. But there are some measures that will really ping on, okay, the frontal lobes are not working well. And many times we will see psychiatric symptoms accompany those declines, if you'd like to talk about that.
Thanks. Yeah. So you alluded to, there's a form of dementia called frontotemporal dementia. You mentioned a while back that is uncommon, but not completely rare, as one of my mentors used to say in the anatomy class or something. So it's out there. I mean, we do see these folks. It typically starts in the 50s for a lot of people when you're not really thinking about dementia. And and really you don't see, at least from my point of view, you don't generally see memory problems early on, but you see bad judgment and changes of personality, and that can really fly under the radar for oftentimes a year or longer before it finally gets diagnosed. But that can certainly show up in a clinical setting or a legal setting too, where you just start making kind of questionable decisions. And, at first you figure, well, anybody can make a mistake, but that the pattern gets more and more frequent, I think.
Dr. Whitted, do you have a question?
Corey Crick is long. Didn't you at the medical center introduce a fitness for duty after a certain age? Did we not?
We get. So at 70, rather than being on a 3-year credentialing cycle, people go to a 1-year credentialing cycle. So they're reevaluated annually instead of used to be 2 years and that's 3 years. And we do have a program where, the concerns are raised by the issue quality committee or by the partners or anything else. We can send them for neuropsych testing. We can send them for, and at 70, we didn't set a specific age, but I will say the trend I've seen over the last few years is, as part of the annual credentialing, at least requiring a physical, I was trying to speak louder, a physical exam by their primary care physician who hopefully knows them and has established a relationship and can do all those, can assess. But as I was sitting here listening to this, it was occurring to me, one of the things we didn't talk about, of your staff covering for you in a very rural state like Nebraska. I mean, something like 50% of the counties in Nebraska don't have a general surgeon in them. So if they only have one general surgeon, everyone's going to be covering so that they don't lose their surgeon or their OBGYN or one of the 3 internal medicine doctors, because they know they won't be able to recruit anyone else. And so, I mean, I think in our big healthcare systems, I actually think in some ways from what I hear in our community, I think we're a little better off. And I really, as I'm listening to this, I have some worries about our rural community partners. I mean, they're so essential in what they do, but I can totally see why the hospitals are willing to cut them some slack. I will say, it might have actually been Pete, when you were the chief of staff, to your point about inappropriate things, you were being very euphemistic about it. And I can remember a case where what came forward was an accusation of sexual harassment. And, at first everyone was like, well, there's no way Dr. X would ever do that. Like, he never says anything inappropriate. He never tells the off-color jokes. And all of a sudden one person says, well, yeah, he does. For about the last 6 months, lots of off-color jokes, maybe a little more touching, inappropriate touching and things like that. And so I will say at the Med Center, I've seen it more than once. And so that now, when those kinds of accusations come forward, particularly with someone who is in the second half of their career, that is now in our differential as we are evaluating them for privileging.
Hey, Glenn, well,
I was gonna say, but you asked me a question, but you didn't ask Bam a question.
the other question was, have you seen anything on a large group practice level? For instance, we have an ophthalmology group that has 10 or 12 people. That's been an effective way of monitoring this. If you don't have one person that you can actually physically go to and say, tell me when I'm losing my abilities, both from a cognitive as well as a procedural standpoint. Have you ever seen anybody set up a system that was good?
Well, one system that's been doing it for a while is, let's see, it's Yale, actually. So this might be, you mentioned the case. I wonder if this was at Yale. So I know Yale's had a mandatory assessment program starting at, I think, age 70 for a while. And they actually, when they rolled it out, they actually turned it into a research study as well. And they found that, I think in the first year, 13% of folks that were tested were, they had concerns about, to where they felt their cognition was sufficiently impaired that it could get in the way of their practice. So 13, like whatever that is, 1 out of 8 or something like that. I'm not sure that answers your question very well, but that is one of they often cite that program, it seems like.
and yeah, CL ended up getting sued over that. So I don't know that I don't think that suit's resolved. So I'm not saying necessarily it was found to be in violation of our anti-discrimination laws or the ADA, but I still think those are answers that had to be we have to have. And I do think you're also maybe going to see some potential regulatory changes where they go ahead and pass a law that says, yes, you can do these type assessments for certain safety sensitive roles like physicians and lawyers, but here are the guardrails of when and how you could do it, how you can use that information. And so, if we're going to go down that road, I think we're much better off to define it all instead of having each individual organization come up with their own set of rules and their own way to implement it. And then also provide some protections, because, it's not fair to an older physician to necessarily put them through these things over and over again or question their abilities, or an older lawyer simply because of their age.
You're hip.
So some things that are already in place that you can extrapolate from include patient surveys. Dr. X was so rude to me, or Dr. Y told me to take one medication but wrote him a script for another medication. And that's for your quality assurance folks to keep an eye on, particularly if it is a change. So Dr. Smith has been getting, 4.5, 5 stars. Great, great, great. Now it's 4. Now it's 3. And patients are very willing to give specific examples if they feel that their physician has not treated them as they should be. So that's not a formal way to look at that, but it is a clue as to there may be something else going on.
Question here.
Question going back to your baseline discussion. Is there a certain age that you see a baseline being effective, like when you take your boards or when you take the bar exam? And then at what point going forward would it be realistic to continue to test every 5 years, every 10 years, so that it's not necessarily age-based? It's, it's when you get into the profession and everybody does it, and then you kind of look at your scores, as you age.
And I think you have to keep in mind that the juice needs to be worth the squeeze, right? So coming in for one of these assessments is stressful and it takes time and money. So we know that cognition is pretty stable until 40s and 50s. So if I had to say this is the age, I would say in one's 50s probably is the best time to get a baseline. Okay, it's after that point where if there is going to be that natural decline with dementia, etc., you'll see it in the decade or two after that. And all the assessment results are age adjusted, right? It accounts for that normal aging. So how often? Right now, I am leaving that up to the person that I'm doing the baseline testing with. If you're noticing some things, or even more importantly, if your spouse is noticing things, or your coworker, and they're kind of on you about it, then it's time to come back and maybe do a full assessment with your physician referral. People don't have to do that. If they want to do a second baseline, you bet, I'm happy to do that. But if there are expressed concerns by people close to them, then the full evaluation is probably a better option than the baseline. Did I answer your question?
Could also, is there not standardized tests, but something similar that would then, be able to document every 5 years your kind of natural decline?
So is there a standardized test that could document your natural decline?
Yes. So the measures that we use as neuropsychologists are all standardized. They're all given in the same way. We have different versions of the test, so there's not a practice effect. So yes, we do have that. Right now for Medicare annual wellness visits, usually it's the mini cog. Here are 3 words to remember, draw a clock, set the time to X time. What were those 3 words? That's the screening, and that kind of monitor. And it's good for what it's for, right? It's quick, it's easy, and it doesn't really make the patients too angry with that. Some physicians' office opt to do the MoCA, the Montreal Cognitive Screen Measure. That's the one that in his first term, Donald Trump took and said, it says I'm a genius. It doesn't. It just says we are looking okay. And then also the mini mental status exam. So the mini mental status exam is easier and doesn't pull as much for that executive functioning as the MoCA does, but the MoCA is harder to give and it takes longer. So you're either usually going to get the mini cog or the mini mental status exam, which again, it helps track over the years how people are doing, but it's what it is. It's a screening. How do I feel about those? Question here, Dr. Longley.
Yeah, your comment about HIPAA, it seems to be correct because there are agencies, for instance, the FAA is a classic, where pilots have to report all medical problems, including testing. The simple presence of a neurocognitive examination in a pilot's history will be an automatic revocation of medical, which is unrecoverable. Doesn't matter how you pass any subsequent tests, it's immediate loss of medical privileges which become permanent and unrecoverable. So there are situations in which physicians who might be pilots will be completely adverse to taking any sort of neurocognitive test, irrespective of how they're doing it.
Agreed.
Yeah, a couple. That reminds me too that at one point, not all that many years ago, the Nebraska physician licensure application asked intrusive questions about past history of mental health treatment, substance abuse treatment, and all. Thanks to Amy Relson, NMA, and a group of dedicated people, that all got changed, and that's happening all over the country. But physicians are like pilots too. They are less so now because of that, but stigma is still alive and well on the mental health front too. Physicians don't seek out mental health care because they're afraid it'll wind up in their record, they'll lose their license, they'll never practice again. Doesn't happen generally with physicians, but they're really quite afraid of that. I'm going to make another random, going back, you said something really interesting about AI, eventually, maybe not eventually, but like relatively soon, kind of helping out with screening and such. I had sort of a chilling thought. I wonder if institutions would do something sneaky and use AI to monitor our behavior. Like, did you send the same email twice in a week? Whoops, you have a short-term memory problem. Or, again, I don't know about other institutions. Our UNMC sends out phishing emails every so often, right? These fake ones. And if you don't catch it, then you have to go to remedial phishing class. So I wonder if they can, send a fake prescription to renew in your electronic health record for a patient for a fictitious name. And if you renew it, I would suggest you're not paying attention or something. I could imagine that happening, I guess.
Speaking of remedial phishing, solos have lifetime board certification. Many of us have boards that they have to retake every 5 or 7 or 10 years. Have you found that recertification is beneficial in identifying physicians who are not competent?
I have not seen a single word again, I didn't do a deep dive into the literature, but what I did see, I did not see a single word about board certification being particularly helpful for this issue. I think it's a good initial, I guess, screen, but it's not a competence. It doesn't seem to be very valuable as a competence assessing tool from what I can tell. And like you, I have one of those permanent board certifications myself, hanging on my wall for whatever that's worth.
Here's a number. Oh, go
I
ahead.
was going to say, Anita. I hadn't given any thought to this until you mentioned the AI, but I do a lot with our EMR at the Med Center, and they do have some AI in it. And honestly, the easiest one would simply be, as a surgeon, it usually takes me an hour to do a lap chole. And suddenly it's taking me an hour and 15 minutes, an hour and 25 minutes, an hour and a half. And you can see the same thing in primary care. If a return visit is usually 15 and, we all run over sometimes, but for the most part, you can get most of your visits done in the time you do. If suddenly it takes you 30 minutes to do a visit that usually takes you 15 minutes, and you can totally see AI being able to pick that up without actually having to go into the medical record on individual patients.
Right. No.
Michael Vicinio has a question. Dr.
Well, I was gonna say that's probably because the residents doing the lab CLE, right? So, so aside from assessing neurocognitive decline, does law or medicine or any other profession kind of have transition strategies, for lack of a better term, to like instead of being shown the door, you kind of transition in kind of a different role. Like maybe you might not physically be able to do surgery anymore, but you're still intact and bright enough to teach surgery or do some other type of role within the institution.
That excellent point, and I think that kind of goes back to these strategies outside of like catching it at the waiting as to the safety net catch of it all, but catching it much earlier in the process. We have lawyers who continue to practice law because they love doing it, and it's intellectually fun for them, and they like helping people. And then we have lawyers that continue to practice law in their 70s and 80s because they don't know what to do with themselves, and the thought of not showing up to the office and being somebody of that role creates a lot of fear for them, and they don't really have a plan. And so we have in the Bar Association tried to create some tools and processes and things to talk to people about transitioning. And it's also not necessarily like from zero, your point, from 60 to zero. It's a kind of a step down role and kind of creating that life outside the law so that when you are ready to retire, you have something to do with yourselves. And I think that's really important. That's a great strategy I think we need to use.
If you don't mind, I'd like to talk a little bit about how to delay normal aging, how to slow that down. So we kind of gloom and doom with this stuff, right?
Yeah.
When I started out in this field a few years ago, there was nothing you could do. You're going to get Alzheimer's. There's nothing you can do about that. Well, that is absolutely not the case. So staying curious is one of the best ways to help keep cognition sharp. Being engaged socially. COVID was such an eye-opener for those of us in this field. People were so isolated, and people that we had seen with mild cognitive impairment had a greater than decline than we would have ever imagined because of that social isolation. Staying physically active, getting out walking 30 minutes a day. It doesn't have to be running a half marathon. Any physical activity can help with that. Keeping your brain active, top of the list, and curiosity does a nice job with that. There's also some pretty compelling evidence out of Rush University on diet and how it can slow cognitive decline, even that associated with normal aging. It's the MIND diet, M-I-N-D. Isn't that a cute name for it, right? It's a riff on the Mediterranean diet, but it's a little more Midwest friendly because they are from Chicago, So it looks at increasing intake of antioxidants and decreasing foods that have inflammatory effect. So Google it. You don't have to buy anything. It's an interesting diet. And then also, as far as treatment goes, would you like to talk about the new treatment for Alzheimer's patients?
Yeah. And just to finish that thought, or to tag onto that too, there's actually, you may know this, the internal medicine docs in the room, or the primary care docs may know this. You can actually get board certified in lifestyle medicine now, because of the obesity epidemic and metabolic syndrome and dementia and all. So you're right. There's much more evidence saying that lifestyle factors are super important at preserving brain health. So what was the question again? Sorry, Mark. Oh, neurophys. Yeah. So there are two existing classes of Alzheimer's medicines, cholinesterase inhibitors like Aricept, and then the memantine or Namenda. They've been out for 15, 20 years. Marginal effects, sometimes help a little bit, but they don't really slow the progression. As of 2 years ago now, we now have monoclonal antibody therapy. So it's an IV infusion. You get either every 2 weeks or every month. And these monoclonal antibodies go in and glom onto amyloid plaques inside the brain and kind of pull them off. And they unfortunately are also kind of marginally effective, but very expensive. But they do appear to actually slow down the progression of the disease. Finally, we actually do have a treatment that slows it down. Doesn't stop it, doesn't reverse it, but at least slows it down. So it's a stepping stone to whatever's coming next too. So we're, the neuroscientists are making some progress here finally.
One final question.
So how do you handle the elderly parent that's more physically declining than mentally, but refuses to give up the car keys, refuses to go to assisted living, refuses to let you help them with their finances?
Well,
Nobody wants to touch that.
Again, every single day I deal with this. And it's a tough one, particularly if the person is cognitively intact and they have medical decision-making capacity, they get to make that bad choice. And so what we recommend are wraparound kinds of things. Having home instead come in for an hour every day just to check in. Getting a smartwatch with an accelerometer. So if they fall, it can call you or call 911. My mom's called 911, by the way. Very helpful. And I like the smartwatch because you can also now get them with a GPS in it and it's more affordable. So if someone falls, it will call to get help. If they fall and are knocked out, they can't push the button on the help, I've fallen and I can't get up pendant. Doesn't do anything. But the smartwatch can be helpful. Technology, embrace this. Put this in your elderly parents' home. Have a little camera. Don't do it covertly. Let them know that you're doing that just to check in on. Use something like Alexa to remind them to take their medications. That can be helpful. So that way you don't have to call every morning at 8 a.m. Did you take your medications? There are pill minder boxes that are electronic that alarm at a time when it's time to take your medication and won't open the pill compartment until it's time to take the medication. Forgetting to take your meds is one thing, not great. Double dosing, big deal. Increases chances for falls, different things like that. So embrace technology. People get to make their own bad choices. When we see that in the hospital too all the time, until something bad happens, like a fall and a broken hip, they're probably gonna stay in their home until they possibly can no longer stay in their home. I wish I had a better answer for that, the magic wand, but again, every day we deal with those.
Yeah. Not very thorough answer. The only thing I'd add technologically that made me think of, I read recently that you can buy like insoles for your shoes where you can hide an air tag. So again, this is, like I say, you shouldn't do things covertly, but what if you have an elderly parent that likes to get out and walk, but you're afraid they might get lost? Well, if they carry their phone or their smartwatch with them, you can track them. But what if they forget to take those? Well, they're always going to wear their shoes, so you can actually apparently track them that way. I thought that was kind of clever.
And you can also add an air tag. You can also put an air tag in their car. Again, I would not recommend it doing covertly. That's a big trust violation. But most people are okay with that if they can keep driving. If it's something that helps them, that they can keep driving. You may or may not know about the driving evaluations with occupational therapy. Madonna has a great program up at Emmanuel. Methodist has one. I don't know if they're doing them at the Med Center or not. It's with an occupational therapist. They do some of the cognitive tasks first. If they pass that, they put them on a simulator, look at peripheral vision, reaction time, and then, bless their soul, the occupational therapist gets behind the wheel with them. And it's not always, you can't drive at all. Sometimes they have some really good suggestions. Local areas, only during daytime hours, low traffic hours, or get a car with the peripheral indicators that someone's there or when you back up. So options. We wrap around as best that we can with that.
Well, you guys, we have hit the hour, and I want to make sure you guys all get home to, if you have basers to relieve and lights to get on with, can you please give a hand to Renee's Kingdom Kiss?